Medieval soldiers never lost fingers to frostbite, yet modern climbers still do, despite having advanced gear. What did a 12th century peasant know about surviving brutal winters that we've completely forgotten? The answer isn't what you think, and it might save your life. When you think about medieval survival gear, your mind probably jumps to chainmail and swords. But the real life-saving technology? Sheep's wool. Those curly, crimped fibers weren't just keeping livestock warm, they were literally the difference between life and death for millions of people. Here's what makes wool absolutely brilliant. Each fiber has thousands of tiny crimps that create air pockets. These microscopic spaces trap warm air close to your body while pushing cold air away. It's like having a personal heating system woven right into your clothes. Modern synthetic fabrics try to copy this, but they're still playing catch-up to technology that sheep perfected millions of years ago. But wait, there's more. Wool contains natural lanolin, basically sheep grease that acts like a built-in waterproofing agent. Your fancy Gore-Tex jacket? Medieval peasants had something similar, except theirs came from a farmyard animal that also provided dinner. Medieval folks figured out the layering game long before outdoor gear companies trademarked the concept. They'd start with a thin wool undergarment, add a heavier wool tunic, then top it off with a thick wool cloak. 3 layers of pure insulation genius. Makes sense, right? The economics were wild too. Wool wasn't just clothing material, it was literally money. Towns built their entire wealth on sheep farming. Venice, Florence, and half the major European cities became powerhouses because they controlled the wool trade. Your sweater was currency. Then there's this mind-blowing fact. Wool can absorb up to 30% of its weight in moisture without feeling wet. Try that with cotton, and you'll be shivering in soggy misery. Medieval people could work up a sweat chopping wood all day, and their wool clothes would still keep them warm when the sun went down. The sheep farmers knew their stuff. They'd breed specifically for the finest, crimpiest wool. Different sheep produced different qualities, some for everyday wear, others for the fancy stuff that made nobles look important at court. It was like having a textile factory that walked around eating grass. Well, here's the thing about wool. It only worked if you had access to sheep. But medieval people weren't putting all their thermal eggs in one woolly basket. They had backup plans that would make modern survivalists jealous. And speaking of backup plans, they discovered something even more effective for the harshest conditions. Now here's where medieval folks got really clever. While wool kept them cozy underneath, they knew the real battle against frostbite happened on the outside. And their secret weapon? Fur. Not just any fur, mind you. We're talking about beaver pelts, fox hides, and rabbit skins that made our ancestors look like walking teddy bears. But here's the kicker. They weren't just showing off their hunting skills. They'd figured out something that took modern science centuries to explain properly. Fur creates what we call today a microclimate. Those individual hairs trap air better than a politician traps voters during election season. Each strand works like a tiny insulation specialist, keeping wind from stealing your body heat. Medieval hunters and farmers knew that a good fur-lined cloak could mean the difference between coming home with all 10 fingers or, well, fewer. But let's be honest here. Getting quality fur wasn't exactly a trip to the mall. You had to track, hunt, skin, and cure these animals yourself. Talk about earning your winter coat. The whole process took weeks, sometimes months. Makes you appreciate that jacket hanging in your closet, doesn't it? The really smart medieval folks layered their fur strategically. Rabbit fur went closest to the skin because it's incredibly soft and lightweight. Then came the heavy hitters, beaver or fox on the outside to handle serious weather. Wealthy merchants and nobles turned this into an art form wearing fur-lined everything. Cloaks, boots, gloves, even fur-lined hats that looked ridiculous but worked like magic. Here's something that'll surprise you. Medieval furriers understood wind chill factor better than most people today. They knew that still air at 20 degrees felt completely different from 20 degrees with a stiff breeze. So they designed their outer garments specifically to block wind while allowing just enough ventilation to prevent dangerous overheating. The downside? Fur was expensive as heck. A quality beaver pelt could cost what a common laborer made in several months. So most regular folks made do with sheepskin or rabbit, while the wealthy strutted around in ermine and mink like medieval fashion influencers. And here's the amusing part. Fur became such a status symbol that people wore it even when they didn't need it. Nothing says, "I've got money," quite like sweating in a fox-lined cape during a mild autumn day. But medieval ingenuity didn't stop at what they wore. Wait until you hear how they turned their beds into heat-trapping sanctuaries using nothing but farm scraps. Now here's where medieval folks got really clever with something we'd never think twice about today. Straw. Yep, the same stuff cows munch on became their secret weapon against freezing floors. Medieval homes weren't exactly equipped with central heating and plush carpeting. Most had dirt, stone, or wooden floors that turned into ice rinks during winter. But these resourceful people figured out that a thick layer of straw could transform a bone-chilling floor into something almost cozy. The science behind this trick is actually brilliant. Straw creates what we call loft, thousands of tiny air pockets, trapped between the hollow stems. Think of it like nature's bubble wrap, except it actually works for insulation. Those air spaces act as thermal barriers, preventing your body heat from getting sucked straight into the frozen ground below. But here's the kicker. They didn't just toss some straw down and call it good. Medieval families knew exactly how thick to lay it. Too thin? Your knees would still freeze during prayers. Too thick? Well, you'd be tripping over yourself like a drunk knight at a wedding feast. Fresh straw worked best because it maintained that crucial fluffiness. Old compressed straw was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. That's why smart households replaced their floor covering every few weeks during the harshest months. The really clever part? They often mixed in sweet-smelling herbs like lavender or mint. Not just for the pleasant aroma, though that certainly beat the alternative medieval house smells, but because these herbs naturally repelled insects and mice that might otherwise set up shop in their cozy straw palace. Some families even got fancy and wove their straw into thick mats. These portable warmth patches could be moved around the house, placed exactly where people spent most of their time. Kind of like medieval area rugs, except they actually served a life-saving purpose. And when bedtime rolled around, they'd pile extra straw under their sleeping areas, creating a natural mattress that insulated them from below while trapping their body heat from above. Smart medieval mothers would fluff this bedding straw daily, maintaining those essential air pockets that meant the difference between restful sleep and chattering teeth all night. The best part about this whole system was its simplicity. No complicated manufacturing, no expensive materials, just agricultural waste turned into a frostbite-fighting floor covering. But keeping warm floors was only half the battle. These medieval survivors had an entire arsenal of homemade remedies that could prevent frostbite before it even started. Now here's where medieval people got really creative. They didn't just rely on wool and fur to beat the cold. They mixed up their own protective potions that would make a modern pharmacy jealous. Medieval herbalists knew something we're just rediscovering. Certain plants could literally warm you from the outside in. Thyme and sage weren't just for seasoning the Sunday roast. These herbs contained natural compounds that boosted blood circulation when rubbed into the skin. Think of it as medieval Bengay, except it actually grew in your backyard. The process was surprisingly sophisticated. Women would crush fresh thyme leaves and mix them with animal fat, usually pig lard or sheep tallow. The fat acted as a carrier, helping the herbs penetrate the skin while creating a protective barrier against wind and moisture. Smart, right? But here's the kicker. They often added crushed garlic to the mix. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, garlic contains allicin, a compound that naturally increases blood flow. Medieval folks may not have known the science, but they definitely knew it worked. Sure, you might smell like a walking Italian restaurant, but frozen fingers weren't exactly attractive either. Then there's the really interesting stuff. Many villages had their own secret recipes passed down through generations. Some added mustard seed for extra heat. Others swore by powdered ginger root. One particularly clever combination included marigold petals, which we now know have anti-inflammatory properties. The application technique mattered too. These salves weren't just slapped on randomly. Experienced herbalists taught people to massage the mixture into pulse points, wrists, temples, behind the ears, places where blood vessels run close to the skin surface. Basically, they figured out pressure points centuries before acupuncture became trendy. What makes this even more impressive? These homemade remedies often outperformed anything available to royalty. While nobles were importing expensive exotic oils from distant lands, peasants were preventing frostbite with weeds from their garden. Talk about practical intelligence. The beauty of these salves went beyond just warmth. They created a waxy coating that repelled moisture, preventing that bone-chilling dampness that makes cold weather truly miserable. Medieval people essentially invented waterproof skin protection using nothing but kitchen scraps and backyard plants. Some herbalists even created internal warming tonics. Hot broths infused with warming spices like pepper and ginger helped generate heat from within. But the real genius wasn't just in what they consumed, it was in how they designed their living spaces to trap and multiply that precious warmth. Medieval hearths weren't just pretty stone circles where families roasted marshmallows. They were the difference between waking up with all 10 toes or counting fewer in the morning. Think of the medieval hearth as the iPhone of its era, revolutionary, essential, and surprisingly sophisticated. These weren't random piles of rocks. Medieval builders positioned central hearths with the precision of modern engineers, understanding airflow and heat distribution better than most people realize. Here's where it gets clever. Early medieval homes featured open hearths right in the center of the main room. Smoke rose naturally through a hole in the roof, while heat radiated outward in all directions. No corners got left out in the cold. Everyone got their fair share of warmth, from the family dog to Great Aunt Gertrude knitting in the corner. But wait, medieval folks weren't satisfied with basic heat distribution. They evolved. By the 12th century, wall-mounted fireplaces began appearing, complete with chimneys. This wasn't just about convenience, it was pure survival engineering. The new design created better draft control, burned fuel more efficiently, and directed heat exactly where families needed it most. Well, here's the part that would make modern heating contractors jealous. Medieval hearths operated on the thermal mass principle. Those massive stone surrounds absorbed heat all day, then released it slowly throughout the night, like having a battery-powered heater that never needed charging. Families planned their entire lives around these heat sources. Sleeping arrangements? Everyone huddled as close as socially acceptable. Cooking, eating, socializing, even indoor work. Everything happened within the hearth's warm embrace. Grandpa's chair wasn't positioned for the best view of the door. It claimed prime real estate next to the fire. Then there's the fuel strategy that kept these medieval heating systems running. Hardwoods burned longer and hotter. Oak was the Rolls-Royce of firewood, dense, reliable, and long-lasting. Families stockpiled cord upon cord during warmer months, understanding that their winter survival depended on autumn preparation. But the real genius lay in heat management techniques. Medieval families used fire screens, reflective surfaces, and strategic furniture placement to maximize every BTU. They positioned wooden screens behind seating areas, bouncing heat back toward people instead of letting it escape into drafty spaces. The average medieval home lost roughly 70% of its heat through poor insulation. Makes sense, right? No weather stripping, single-pane windows, and gaps everywhere, yet families survived brutal winters year after year. However, hearths alone couldn't solve every cold weather challenge. Smart medieval families discovered that the ground beneath their feet held secrets for staying warm that modern science is only beginning to appreciate. Medieval builders stumbled onto something brilliant without even realizing it. While modern homeowners obsess over expensive flooring options, these folks were literally walking on one of nature's best temperature control systems. Their dirt floors weren't a sign of poverty, they were accidentally genius. Here's the wild part. Earthen floors act like massive heat batteries. During the day, that compacted clay and dirt slowly absorbed warmth from fires, sunlight, and body heat. Then at night, when temperatures dropped, the floor gradually released that stored heat back into the room. It's the same principle engineers use in modern passive solar homes, except medieval peasants figured it out by accident. But they didn't stop there. Smart families learned to pack animal dung into their floor mixture. Gross? Absolutely. Effective? You bet. The organic matter created tiny air pockets that boosted insulation, while the natural oils made the surface more water resistant. Think of it as medieval laminate flooring, just with a lot more character. Then there's the rush trick that would make interior designers weep with joy. Families scattered fresh rushes, reeds, and straw across their earthen floors like living carpets. These weren't just for show. They created an additional insulation layer that trapped warm air near the ground. Sweet-smelling herbs got mixed in too, turning floors into giant potpourri that actually served a purpose. The maintenance routine sounds exhausting, though. Every few weeks, old rushes had to be swept out and replaced. Imagine explaining that chore to your teenagers today. Sorry kids, time to change the floor again. Medieval folks also discovered that adding fat or oil to their dirt floors created a surprisingly durable surface. Rendered animal fat mixed into clay formed a natural sealant that prevented moisture from seeping up through the ground. Some wealthy families even used beeswax for extra protection. Suddenly, that expensive hardwood floor in your living room doesn't seem so innovative. The thermal mass effect worked so well that many medieval homes stayed surprisingly comfortable even during brutal winters. While castle dwellers dealt with cold stone floors that sucked heat from your feet faster than a tax collector, peasant families enjoyed floors that actually contributed to their warmth. What's really crazy is how this simple technology completely disappeared. We traded thermal efficiency for the appearance of wealth, swapping heat-storing earth for heat-stealing materials like stone and tile. Of course, staying warm involved more than just smart flooring choices. The real secret lay in what medieval families put into their bodies during those long winter months. When the snow started falling, medieval folks didn't just bundle up and hope for the best. They ate their way to warmth. And honestly, they knew something about survival that most of us have completely forgotten. Picture this. While we're reaching for energy bars and hot chocolate, medieval people were strategically loading up on foods that literally turned their bodies into furnaces. We're talking about a diet so rich in fat and protein that it made their metabolism work overtime just to digest it. Brilliant, right? The centerpiece of their winter survival menu? Thick, fatty broths that simmered for hours. These weren't your grandmother's chicken soups. We're talking about bone marrow stews that packed more calories per spoonful than a modern protein shake. The fat content alone was enough to keep their internal fires burning through the coldest nights. But here's where it gets interesting. They didn't just eat heavy foods randomly. Medieval cooks knew exactly which spices cranked up body heat. Ginger wasn't just for flavor, it got blood pumping to fingers and toes. Mustard seed made you sweat even in freezing weather. And pepper? Well, there's a reason it was worth its weight in gold. Then there's the drinking situation. While shepherds spent endless hours outdoors watching their flocks, they carried something that would make modern outdoor enthusiasts jealous. Hot ale mixed with warming. Spices. Think of it as the medieval version of a thermal drink, except it actually worked and probably tasted a lot better than anything from a camping store. And the weird part is, some folks took this heat thing to the next level. They'd heat up stones by the fire, wrap them in cloth, and stuff them into their belts or under their clothes, basically turning themselves into walking hot water bottles. Monks figured out they could warm bricks and carry them under their robes during their outdoor chores. Makes sense when you think about it. These people understood something we've forgotten in our climate-controlled world. Food isn't just fuel, it's internal heating. Every bite was calculated to keep them alive through months of bitter cold. But eating your way to warmth was just one piece of the puzzle. The real genius wasn't just in what they consumed, it was in how they designed their entire living spaces to trap and hold every precious degree of heat they could generate. Medieval builders weren't messing around when winter came knocking. They figured out something our modern architects seem to have forgotten. Thick walls actually work better than whatever fancy insulation we're peddling today. Picture a medieval stone cottage. Those walls weren't just thick because they ran out of things to do with rocks. We're talking about walls that were often 2 to 3 feet thick. That's thicker than my Uncle Bob's reading glasses and twice as effective at keeping the cold out. But here's where it gets clever. Small windows weren't a design flaw, they were genius. While we modern folks love our floor-to-ceiling glass walls that turn our homes into expensive refrigerators, medieval builders knew that every square inch of window was basically an open door for heat to escape. The half-timbered houses you see in old European towns, those weren't built for Instagram photos. The timber frame created pockets of insulation when packed with clay, straw, and whatever else they could find. It was like creating a medieval thermos bottle, except you could live inside it. Stone walls brought their own magic trick. Thermal mass. During the day, those massive stones would soak up heat from the fire like a giant battery. Then, when night fell and temperatures dropped, the walls would slowly release that stored warmth back into the room. Makes sense, right? Research shows these old designs were about 30% more effective at heat retention than many later buildings that got obsessed with ventilation. Turns out, sometimes older really is better. Kind of like how my grandmother's cast iron skillet still outperforms any nonstick nonsense from the store. Medieval builders also understood something we've forgotten. You don't need perfect ventilation if you're trying not to freeze to death. They designed homes that breathed just enough to prevent problems, but sealed tight enough to trap precious heat. The positioning mattered too. Doorways faced away from prevailing winds. Rooms were built smaller to heat more efficiently. Every architectural choice was basically asking the same question: will this keep us alive until spring? And the weird part is, many of these techniques worked so well that some medieval buildings are still standing today, still keeping people warm after hundreds of years. But building smart was just part of the survival puzzle. Even the best shelter meant nothing if you couldn't keep that crucial fire burning through the long winter nights